Hi everyone, it's Miss Kessling. I wanted to do a lesson on Chapter 9, which we've been doing for the last couple days, Lesson 3, which is on energy and matter. So this is going to be found in that black book online with the leopard on it, pages 324 to 332. So there's some pictures and explanations in the book that are good, so you might want to use those as you are doing your assignment on this for tomorrow. So your key concepts you're going to know by the time you're done is how does energy move through ecosystems? How is the movement of energy in an ecosystem modeled? There's a few models. And then also how does matter move in an ecosystem? So first off, let's review. There's 6 characteristics that all living things have in common. If you remember these are things that all living things share. So just to review, they are made up of one or more cells. The second one is that they grow and develop. The third one is that all living things reproduce. The fourth one, and the reason why we're doing this is because the last one ties into all of this. They respond to stimuli, things around them they respond to. They maintain homeostasis, and then this is the one that ties into this chapter. They use energy. So all living things use energy in some way. Now, the ways in which organisms get their energy is different depending on how they're classified. So there's producers and there's consumers, and we're going to go into a little bit more detail about those. So a producer, these are organisms that change the energy from their environment into food. So they get their energy from sunlight. And then they use the process called photosynthesis or chemosynthesis, where they take that energy and then change it into a food source for themselves. So for example, plants get the energy from the sun, and then they change that energy from the sun into something called glucose, which is a natural sugar, which then helps them produce the food they need, and then they give off oxygen, which is used by other organisms. Then we have consumers, which these organisms cannot make their own food. So the sunlight has nothing to do with consumers being able to produce food. If that were the case, we would just be able to go outside and sit outside in order to get food for ourselves, and we cannot do that. So there are a couple ways in which consumers, different versions of consumers. So we have a herbivore, omnivores, carnivores, and detritivores. They are herbivores are plant eaters. These are organisms that only eat plants. Then you have carnivores, which are organisms that eat only meats. Then you have omnivores, which would be like people that eat plants and meats. And then you have the detritivores that are basically they're decomposers. They're organisms like insects and fungi and worms and bacteria that eat off of the dead plant and animal matter that exists in ecosystems. So these are basically a decomposer. They decompose things around them. So again, plant eaters, meat eaters, both plants and meat, and then we have decomposers that eat the dead material around them. If you ever think of like a forest, eventually the forest, the leaves that have fallen off the trees don't stay there forever. They decompose because what's eating those leaves that have fallen off the trees is bacteria and mushrooms and worms. So that's why when you go back into the woods after like a winter or summer, the woods aren't covered with years and years and years and years of leaf foliage. It has eventually been decomposed. Then we have some ways in which modeling of the energy. So now this is going to be found on page 328. So when you go to do this, if you need more help with this, you're going to find this on page 328 and 329. So we've talked about a lot of this. The only one we have not spoken about is the food or the energy pyramid. But we did talk about a food chain not too long ago. So these are models that show the flow of energy in an ecosystem through feeding relationships. So here's an example of one. It's just that it's a chain. The fox eats the rabbit eats the grass. It just shows you one path of energy across a chain of organisms. A food web shows it across several chains. So now it's not just one, it's actually forming like a spider web. We did one of these in our book with chapter 9 where it talked about, or chapter 1, where it talked about all these energy flows. So here's an example. You just follow the path of the arrow to see what eats what. So in this case, the arrow, this eagle eats the snake, the eagle also eats the rat, the eagle also eats the wolf in this case, which I'm not too sure if that's maybe little wolves, and then the birds and so on. So this shows the path across many organisms. Then we have an energy pyramid, which this shows the amount of energy available at each step of the food chain. So it shows how much energy there possibly can be at each step. So on the bottom, that's where most of the energy is going to be, because the energy is coming from the sun. As it goes up the pyramid, you can see the levels are getting more and more narrow. As it gets up to the top, that's showing you that the amount of energy is decreasing. So in this case, the very top, this is where the least amount of energy is. As you go down, the energy levels increase the most. More energy is towards the bottom in this case, because like I said, producers are getting the most energy coming from the sun. And again, there's a really good example of this on page 329, a different type of picture that you can look at to help you with this. All right, and then we have some matter cycles. Now we have a water cycle, an oxygen cycle, and a carbon cycle. You've probably learned a lot about cycles in 6th grade too, when we talked about the rock cycle. So basically a cycle just shows how certain things go through the ecosystem. So in this case, matter cycles show that path of water or oxygen or carbon dioxide. So let's look at this one first. I'm going to make this screen bigger. The water cycle. The water cycle shows you the path of water through an ecosystem. So it starts with, well, you can start anywhere here, but we're going to start with precipitation. So when it rains, water collects. As it collects, it then evaporates with the heat from the sun. The water evaporates back into the sky, condenses, and then turns into more precipitation. So it's just the path of water through the ecosystem. So it rains, it collects, it evaporates, condenses, and then goes back into precipitation. Whether that precipitation is rainfall, hail, snow, what have you, it then restarts the whole cycle all over again. Then we have the oxygen cycle, which is pretty easy in this case. Organisms, all organisms require oxygen and carbon dioxide. So we get our oxygen from the plants around us. So do most organisms, like animals and reptiles and most animals, all animals. So plants, though, don't need oxygen. They give off oxygen. So as they give off oxygen, people and organisms like animals are taking in that oxygen, and then we give off carbon dioxide, which is required by the trees and the plants. So it's a give and take relationship. They give us oxygen, we give them carbon dioxide. And as that path just keeps going through, they keep producing oxygen and we keep giving them carbon dioxide. That leads us to the cycle as well, which is part of that. Carbon dioxide doesn't only come from people, but it also comes from like animals that are eating certain things. So animals eat plants with carbon dioxide, and then they, decompose the carbon dioxide. When an animal dies, decomposers give off that carbon dioxide, and then it goes back into the earth, and then into the air, and then back into the trees. So the carbon cycle is a little bit more complicated. There's a really good example on page 332 of this. So let me flip to that, and okay, sorry guys, I had to pause the video. My dog was chasing something outside. Okay, so the carbon dioxide just shows how carbon dioxide goes into the earth and then back out to help organisms survive. So like I said, similar to us taking in oxygen and giving off carbon dioxide, animals will give off carbon dioxide, decomposing animals will give off carbon dioxide, even carbon dioxide from combustion that occurs on the earth, and then the green plants absorb that carbon dioxide. And that's just, again, a cycle that they go through. Like I said, page 332 is a good example of where you can find out more about that. Alright, so I'm going to give you a review on this for tomorrow, so feel free to use this video. Or, like I said, in the textbook, This chapter starts on page 324, I'm sorry, lesson, and ends on page 332. All right, guys, I'll see you next week with our next one.